The date was July 3rd, 1863. And by the time the guns fell silent that day, 40,000 men, 40,000 American men lay dead, dying, or wounded. Talking about the Battle of Gettysburg. You know, a few years ago, my daughter and I, Lucy, we visited that battlefield. We took a bike tour throughout the grounds. And that was not the first time I was there, but it was a great, sobering reminder. In my travels across the U.S., I've made it a point to visit as many of these types of places as I possibly can, to make me think, to remind me, to make me appreciate just how frickin' good we have it. They say during that battle, over 3,000 horses alone were killed. So many horses on that hot July day had been killed that they heaped them into great piles and burned their carcasses, their bodies, because the smell of flesh was making the townspeople of Gettysburg gag and vomit. Thousands of bodies buried in ad hoc graves. Did you know in 1996, a body of a soldier was found about a mile outside of town? 1996, the battle was in 1863. There were so many bodies strewn around the grounds that up until 1996, they still had not found all of the remains. That's incredible. That young man's body was taken to the Smithsonian, where they said he was between the height of 5'8" and 5'9" and had been killed by a bullet to the back of the head. Why am I talking about this today? Well, of course, today is the 2nd of July, 2021. We've got July 4th coming up in a few days. I think it's fitting to talk about because we see all the violence and the craziness going on, not only in the world, but in our country. I think it's good that we're reminded that now we are safer than ever. And you know what? This will hurt some people's feelings. We're pussies now. We are pussies in comparison to the type of men and women that lived in 1863. There was a 69-year-old man. I've made some notes here. His name was John Burns. I remember reading about John Burns the several times I was at the battlefield. John was 69 years old. He was a veteran of the War of 1812. John got his gear together and went out on the battlefield and fought. 69 years old alongside the Union soldiers. And there's a great story, I challenge you to read about it, that goes along with Mr. Burns. He was wounded, but went on to live. I believe he was 74, something like that, when he finally died. Do some research on him. How many 69-year-old men do you know now, and we all know some, are willing to do something like that? You know, in fact, how many people in general do you know are willing to go to that length for what they believe in? The people then were so different than they are today that the only civilian casualty was a girl named Jenny. Young Jenny, on the morning of the 3rd, was making bread when a round came through the window and hit her and killed her. Mary Virginia Jenny Wade was her full name. July 3rd at about 8:30 in the morning, just east of Cemetery Hill. Could you imagine living now where there was a battle, mind you, with almost 200,000 people going on in the town that you lived in, and you just go ahead and make some bread? We're quite different today, are we not? We're weaker. We have less intestinal fortitude, less ability to deal with the vicissitudes of life. I love that word, with the ups and downs, the ebbs and the flow. We have less of an ability to deal with things that make us uncomfortable. Geez, it's really hot out. Geez, there's almost 200,000 soldiers laying waste to each other outside of my window. I think I'll make some bread. We get pissed off if we have to sit in traffic. We get pissed off if we have to be in a place that doesn't have perfect air conditioning or perfect heat or delicious fresh spring water. There were almost 200,000 people killing each other outside this girl's window, and she decided to make bread. Now, let's think about this. This is not a conspiracy from government that we're weaker. It's not a planned or vilified concept of the powers that be, it's your fault. It's my fault. It's your mother's fault. It's your father's fault. We want things like toasters and TVs and refrigerators. We don't want to have to make bread to have lunch. We want to be able to buy it. So rather than look at these things and say, woe is me, we're too soft, toughen up, man. Toughen the hell up. I thought it would be fitting to just talk about some of the things that went on there. Here's a description of some of the horrific scenes that greeted the parties sent out to bury the dead at nightfall. This was a New Jersey soldier. He said some with faces bloated and blackened beyond recognition lay with glassy eyes. They stared up at the blazing summer sun. Others with faces downward and clenched hands filled with the grass or the earth, which told of the agony of the last moments. Here a headless trunk, there a severed limb. In all the grotesque positions that unbearable pain and intense suffering contorts the human form, they lay. That's pretty heavy stuff. Heavy rains had washed away the earth from many of the shallow graves. Grotesquely blackened hands and arms and legs protruded from the earth like the devil's own planting, a harvest of death, while the stench of death hung heavy in the air. Dang. How can we learn from this? How can we take what they did, this battle to end all battles, probably, as some have said, the most gruesome, the most grotesque fighting on our soil of all time? And there's the numbers are staggering. 94,000 Union soldiers mustered that day and 71,000 Confederates. 3,100 dead Union soldiers and 3,900 dead Confederates. You know, another note about the horses, they say during the totality of the Civil War, anywhere between 1 and 3 million animals, depending on if you're counting horses, mules, and donkeys, died. 1 to 3 million. Can you imagine? We have in this modern world, no concept of that kind of death and destruction. Even in other wars, at that time, the amount of our population percentage-wise that was involved in that carnage is staggering. I think that's why later on, as they commemorated that battlefield, Lincoln said the things he said. How many of you remember this and had to memorize it as a child? 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. You know, that pisses people off this day. They say they weren't created equal. According to those people, they enslaved us. They did these things. Yes, but the work that they did then gives us the world that we have now. It's our job to propagate what they did then, to continue it. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war, and we have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who gave their lives that this nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here. If only he knew I'd be reading his words today. But it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work, which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these men shall not have died in vain, and that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that this government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from this earth again. Some heavy words. You know what's cool if you read about that? There's multiple versions of Lincoln's speech. And the interesting thing, when they set up this ceremony, before Lincoln spoke, another man spoke for 2 hours. He was said to be one of the greatest orators of the day. For 2 hours, Lincoln got up and spoke for 2 minutes. That man, my paraphrasing, later told Lincoln in a letter, "I wish that I could have captured your feelings in 2 hours like you did in 2 minutes. I took this 2 hours and I couldn't say the things you said in 2 minutes." Lincoln was an intelligent and wise man. Here's my point. Here's what I want you to think about, if you care. All this stuff has happened. It's in the past. It's dust. But the energy that those people put forth at that time, good, bad, right, or wrong, to keep this union together is still here today. If it was not for those battles, if it was not for the 91,000 Union and the 70 some odd thousand from the Confederate armies fighting there, we wouldn't be here today. That's intense. Lincoln's words are no less true today than they were that day. Tomorrow, the battlefield will come to a close down there, back in history in 1863. We've got our own stuff going on today, and it is nothing in comparison to what went on then. I think looking back, it should give us pause. It should give us hope. Hope. We don't have graves of 3,900 men dug quickly in trenches at night. We do not have these things happening. We have all kinds of horrors and tragedies. We don't have 1 million dead horses. We need to put things into perspective and be so grateful for what we have. You know what? I also hope that we can start raising some tough people, making ourselves tougher. Maybe from time to time, we should think about the calamities going on in the world and maybe make some bread. That's all I got. Be well. Don't be dickheads. Long live the Republic.